Thank you, Rich. Welcome everyone to tonight's class on sketching hands. Tonight's class is a one-off class, but it is a bit of a lead up to next week's class on some hand studies, which I will show you in a second because I'll have to disrupt my little table display here to show you. But we're going to be drawing hands again next week in pen and ink. So you can sign up for next week's class, the same place that you signed up for tonight's class on the Michaels website. And then the third class that I will be teaching for Michaels this month is on perspective studies using a Polaroid box. And we're going to be using alcohol-based markers for that class. And that will be a lot of fun. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my, or actually before I do that, since I've got some three-dimensional stuff here, I might just talk about hands a little bit so I can use my wooden mannequin hand, and then I'll put this away and switch to my tabletop view. So we've had a few other classes on drawing hands over the years, or I have since I've been teaching these classes for Michael since 2021. And two of the previous classes were premium classes, so they were only available at that time for folks who signed up ahead of time and paid for those classes. So I don't have the reference on YouTube, but I do plan to go ahead and do another drawing hands class with the wooden mannequin hand at some point, since I realized that I don't have the YouTube class or the YouTube video of that class available. But this was the product of that class where we drew the wooden mannequin hand. So if tonight's class goes a little fast for you, or if you feel like it's just a struggle to draw like the actual human hand, then I do recommend getting one of these Artist Loft wooden mannequin hands that they sell at Michael's and practicing with this a little bit, because it just helps to see the three-dimensional shapes that we're drawing here. And when it comes to drawing human beings, I've been teaching adults for 10 years now, and I've really gotten into the psyche and the psychology of what it is about certain subject matter that really just stumps a lot of people. And it's faces and hands are two of those things that a lot of folks just really can't get away from the two-dimensional flat symbol of that three-dimensional form. So even though you're aware that your hand is a three-dimensional subject, right? It has cylinders, it has a bit of a, what shape would we call this? A little bit of a rectangular prism happening here. If we had to call this something, I would call it a rectangular prism. It's obviously pretty organic shape, but and then we've got cylinders for the fingers, and they move around. It's not a static thing, so it takes on a lot of different shapes. Those three-dimensional forms take on different shapes themselves, but people really struggle with wanting to draw it as a flat thing, as something that has a hard outline around it and is flat, and it's obviously not flat. So same thing with faces. We struggle and we want to make like a nose, a triangle, like a flat two-dimensional shape, or we want to make eyes an almond shape. Those are two-dimensional shapes, and we want to look for the three-dimensional form. So sketching from a wooden mannequin hand can be really helpful because you can just see it more as this weighted object, you know? Okay, so I'm gonna set that aside, and I don't have the YouTube link for that class on sketching the wooden mannequin hand available to share with you, but I do plan on doing another class with that mannequin hand coming up soon, because I think that would be helpful in the next few months. So I'll go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over the supplies, which are very simple for tonight's class. So we're just using I have an Artist Loft a drawing pad here, like this one. I've got some Artist Loft sketching pencils and some erasers, and that is it. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes from what you do tonight in the class. And you can follow me on Instagram at ADHodge, ADIE Hodge, my little nickname there. And then here are some of my business cards with my serial artwork that I do using calligraphy ink. I'm also on Facebook, Adrian Hodge Fine Art. All right. So I'm gonna just skip to a blank page. Oh, just trying to erase a smudge on there and I just smudged it even more. Okay, so you might have a product that looks like this by tonight's class, by the end of tonight's class, or you might have just a series of sketches as you just figure out the 3 dimensions of the hand. So we're not really working towards a product tonight so much as an understanding of the hand. So I've kind of combined a few different drawings here where I'm diagramming the hand, looking at the contour lines and the overall 3-dimensional form. And we're using this reference photo tonight. And then I made the photograph black and white. And then I also made the, from the black and white photo, I inverted the light on the photo so that all of the light is showing up dark and all of the dark is showing up light. And it's a little washed out on the Zoom screen, but if you look on the document yourself, you should be able to see some variations in the light there. Zoom in so you can see that a little bit more. So we'll be using those to help us out tonight. And then in the rest of the document, these are for the classes that, or the class that we have coming up next week. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to that page in my sketchbook so you can see what we have coming up. Next week, we're going to be zooming in on a couple of these photos and doing some fun renderings of those using pen and ink. I'm just going to tear this page out of my sketchbook so I have it handy. Unintended. And then flip to a blank page so we can get started tonight. Okay, so I said I wanted to diagram the hand a little bit here. When we do that, I'm going to be looking at the overall shape that the hand makes, the outer shape. Even though we don't want to get too sucked into the outer lines, I want to notice a few aspects of the outer shape of the hand. For one, how if we were to trace a line above the fingers, how we get this little an arch here above the fingers. The middle finger sticks up the highest, the pinky finger comes down lower, and the index finger comes down just below the middle finger. And then we can also trace that over to the thumb using a diagonal line right here. So we're looking at the negative space and we're looking at this imaginary line right here that arches above the fingers. Okay, so we're going to look for that as we begin to sketch a little diagram here. Then we're going to notice the invisible line or thread that connects the first set of knuckles on the fingers, and we're going to notice how those line up. So we can see how they line up next to each other here, but we're going to imagine a thread or a line that connects them. Okay, so we're going to notice that line, that imaginary line. Then we're going to notice the second set of knuckles here, the middle knuckles on the fingers, and we're going to notice that imaginary line that connects those. Okay, that line. So those are the lines we're going to start with. And then the knuckles that connect the fingers to the hands right here. this imaginary line right here. And this is another reason why the wooden mannequin hand is so helpful. And I didn't put the wooden hand on the supply list. I just realized right before class how it would be helpful to refer back to it. But noticing how those joints line up on the wooden hand can be helpful as well. And also to think about these basic shapes that are used here so that we don't get too lost in the 3 dimensions, and we can focus on basic 3D forms as we go here, or just the basic lines first. Okay, so that's another line that we're going to draw, and then the line of the wrist. So we are going to start out very general to specific, meaning we're going to start out with general 2-dimensional shapes, and then we're going to build up to the 3-dimensional shapes of the hand. But I want us to start with a diagram of these lines, and then we'll build on our shapes on top of that. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm seeing a lot of stuff popping up in the chat, but I have not been looking at it. Oh, thank you, Rich, for dropping the link to purchasing a wooden mannequin hand.
No questions yet.
Okay, cool. Okay, so also I'm just going to use a darker pencil than what I would use if I was sketching on my own. I would probably start with an H pencil if I was sketching by myself, but since I want y'all to be able to see my lines showing up on the Zoom, I'm going to use a little bit darker pencil. I'm going to use a 2B here. I'm just sharpening that a little bit. Okay, so like I said, I want to start with this curved line here at the top. And we want to curve it up a little like a boomerang, a little closer, like more than halfway, closer to the right, because that middle finger sticks up closer to the right. Oh, let me scooch my drawing down a little bit. So we're just looking for a curved line like that. And adjustments can be made. That's why you're drawing with a light pencil. So not expecting anybody to have a perfect line here. And then we're going to have a diagonal line over here to the side. That's where our thumb is connecting. And then let's go ahead and jump down to where the thumb line is, about here. And because notice how where the thumb sticks out is right in line with the knuckles that attach to the hand. See how we can almost have a straight line right here? And that's also something that could be apparent with the wooden hand. See, I can get my pencil to go right across right here. Our eyes can really play tricks on us with these proportions. So the more of a pattern that we can find, the better off we'll be. So maybe we'll even go ahead and extend this line out and go like this, but then we want this line to be slightly curved right here. But that is where you want that line to be. Okay, and then we'll go about 1/3 of the way up from this line to that line, about 1/3 of the way up. And we'll do another curved line that arches up in the same way that our top boomerang line does. And then we want one more of those 1/3 of the way up again. And so we got like a little rainbow stacked here. We've got 4 lines that look kind of like a boomerang. Not so much a rainbow, but more of a boomerang line. And like a fishing hook a little bit. We want this bottom one to curve slightly as well. And we want that bottom one to be mostly in line with the bottom of our diagonal line that we drew over here. And that indicates where our thumb is gonna go, right? All right, and then let's go down about, actually, we're gonna draw a big rectangle, or yeah, it's more of a rectangle than a square here. It's kind of a rounded rectangle. I'm gonna do that. Draw our little rounded rectangle. We've got a rounded rectangle, and we've got some boomerangs, and we got a diagonal line. And then at the bottom of our rounded rectangle, we're going to draw another line for the wrist. And we want that line to be slightly at a downward angle as well. Okay, so far, this is what we have. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And these lines and shapes do not have to be perfect. Hopefully you're drawing nice and light with a pencil, like an H pencil, that you can easily erase so that you're not attached to any of these lines and they can be adjusted as we go. Okay. So now we're going to start to get a little bit more of some three-dimensional forms going and not so much just the shapes. So here is where we want a cylinder. And I want us to go ahead and start to think of it as a cylinder as having three dimensions to it, not something that's flat. So we want this to come off. You want to watch me first and just wait a second. So you can start with like a rectangle, because that's basically what a cylinder is. It's a rectangle that has become round, right? So we've got our rectangle, and then we've got a cylinder. And so on a cylinder, we've got vertical axis that's mostly straight. And then we've got a horizontal axis that's curved. And since we're looking down at this cylinder, the contours are curving in a downward direction. So that's the idea that we want to keep in mind on this cylinder. We want to think about the downward angle curve on the horizontal axis. So I'm going to probably draw this hand a couple of times because I'm doing this like really basic. I'm drawing really dark with my lines and it's going to be hard for me to erase this. So this is going to be kind of my throwaway sketch right here. And then on my next go around, it's going to be a little bit more serious. So just bear with me. This is why I said we might not have a perfect product at the end of the class that looks like this. We might have three different drawings that we combine that would look like this if you layered the three different drawings. We're breaking down the diagram first, then we're going to look at the three dimensions, then we're going to draw it a little bit more specifically looking at the value and adding some value on top of that and making those proportions a little more realistic. But for now, I just want to notice how we can go from flat two-dimensional shapes to 3D forms. Okay, so we're going to think about a cylinder right there. And then we're not going to worry about that being perfect at the moment. Then we're going to draw something that feels kind of like a chicken wing over here. Okay, so let's just go ahead and think about a chicken wing. We're going to draw a chicken wing. Or maybe like a nose dropper, nose sucker, which you use to help a baby clear out their nose. Or a chicken wing, but something that looks like that, right? Because we've got this meaty part of the hand that really resembles a chicken wing right there. Okay. So we've got that shape. I'm just going to adjust mine a little bit. All right. And then I also want us to start to think about how this is rounded as well. This side of the hand is also rounded. So we're thinking about how this is like a rectangular prism as well. And so we've got these curved, although here we're looking more at our chicken wing, but it starts out flat right here above where the thumb goes out. So adjust your shapes as necessary here. But we're thinking about how this is not completely flat, but curved. And then we also have some rounded aspects happening here. So I want us to start to think about these curves that are happening on this part of the padding of the hand, in the palm. And then notice how there are these dips and curves within, and those lines in the center of the palm can really show us, you know, what's happening here, because the line actually curves there, right? And the line curves around the edge of the palm there, but then through the center of the palm, the line feels straight. So we can draw those lines that somebody who is a palm reader might notice. And draw those lines in there. We're just noticing these three-dimensional shapes here, or these three-dimensional forms. And if you want to get a little more exact on the thumb, we're looking for kind of a straight line right there. And then a line that curves like this. So like an inward curve. And I find that stacking these shapes this way is a little easier than just going for it and trying to draw the thumb shape, noticing how these three-dimensional forms stack on top of each other. And I'm also looking at the negative space. So I'm looking at the negative space around the thumb, this shape that's being created if we were to imagine that diagonal line that we talked about, that we outlined before. So we can imagine that diagonal line that doesn't want to stay there, that diagonal line, and we're looking at this negative space shape, like a V shape within there. Okay. So it's coming along. And then now we want to think about these fingers, but let's first think about the cylinder. So let's not worry about them being perfect fingers yet. I want you to just start with some long rectangles and notice the spacing in between the fingers on the hand as you draw your rectangles, and try to get the spacing of the rectangles close to what you're seeing in the photograph. Don't worry about making them a three-dimensional form just yet. Their pinky one sticks out a little more over here. So I'm noticing this negative space again in between the way that the hand is positioned here. By the way, this is a model named Demetrius, who we have drawn before in several classes where we've done some figure drawing. I collected these photos a while back with Demetrius here in Austin at my studio, and reusing some of these photos from a while back, about 2 years ago, almost, maybe even more than 2 years ago when I collected these photos. Okay, so maybe a year and a half ago. Anyway, I'm looking at that negative space. So I've got that little U shape that then turns into a V shape here. There's more space in between the ring finger and the pinky finger there. And then it's a little more narrow in between these. A little more narrow here. Okay, but we're not looking for perfect proportions here yet. We're just, because my proportions are way off on this one so far. I just want us to get a sense of these 2D shapes that we're trying to turn into the idea of three-dimensional forms. Okay, and then we'll curve them up here at the top. And think about a thimble, what you use when you're sewing. Put that little thimble on your finger. We're looking for that shape, and your fingers that you draw may go a little bit above the line that we drew. That was just a general guide there. And we're going to get more exact with our proportions as we go along. I just want us to get a general sense of the three-dimensional form. So I want us to start to notice the cylindrical shape of all of these, how we have a curved line. And at a certain point, that curve is going to shift a little bit, and it might shift in different directions. So it might appear to curve down. It might be curving down on almost all of them, actually. I'm just looking with my eyes, using my pencil to look. Yeah, I feel like it's a downward curve, and that's how I drew it here. As a downward curve, although the index finger, I feel like, needs to curve up. One thing I'm looking at is the actual wrinkles of the knuckles and seeing which direction they appear they might curve, even though they feel a little flat. There's an upward curve to that one, and these feel like they have more of a downward curve. So that's what I'm looking at. So I kind of switched it and did an upward curve so far here. I feel like I'm seeing an upward curve there. It feels kind of flat there. Maybe we'll just make it a little flat. It depends on the point of view of the viewer. Just like if our eye line is here looking down, then the cylinder is going to curve down. And when I took the photo, I think my camera was probably straight on at the hand. So maybe that's why it's throwing me off slightly. But this sketch does not have to be perfect. We're just getting a general understanding. And it may switch. It may be that like at the top of the finger, it feels like it curves up. And then at a certain point, it feels more straight. And then it starts to curve down. All right. And then on that vertical axis, just like on the cylinder, it's following the vertical sides of the cylinder. These axes are going to kind of spread out with the outer edges of the finger. So it's going to be a little organic and not perfect. It might bulge out slightly and then curve in around the knuckles and then curve out again. So we're noticing that organic shape. Okay, let's talk about the 3 dimensions of the thumb area over here in that meaty part that I was calling like a chicken wing. So we've got this big curve out right here, and we can see that it comes towards us, the light hits it more, it's more elevated than this part of the hand. And we have this little wrinkle here. So we're noticing the contour lines. The contour lines are all of the lines that describe the surface of a form. And Rich has the link to one of our classes on that I refer back to often on rendering three-dimensional forms using contour lines, where we looked at a lime from multiple angles and noticed how the contours shift depending on the point of view of looking at that lime. And if you're watching later on YouTube, you can just search the keywords 3D forms and contour lines and my name, Adrienne Hodge, and it should come up. All right, so we're just noticing these three-dimensional curves. And on this side, it's going to radiate out the same way as the sides do. And it's going to curve along that padding, which feels very rounded right here, like a bulb. And then here it's more flat. So we're using hatching and cross hatching lines tonight, but we're also using those cross hatching lines in a way that follow the contour lines. Okay, so now that we've got this like basic diagram down where the proportions are not exact at all, I want us to get a little more organic with our next rendering of the hand. But before we do that, to loosen up, I want to do some blind contours. So blind contours are sketches that we do where we don't look at our drawing paper, and we only look at our subject. So in this case, it would be the hand photograph that we have here. But instead of using the true to light photograph, I want to look at the inverted light photo and the black and white version of the photo. And when we're looking at that, I want us to look at the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So like here on the black and white photo, I'm just going to sharpen my pencil a little bit. It'll help me point better. Okay, so here on the black and white photo, I'm looking at this particular shape that is black. And then if I look at the inverted light photo, that shape shows up white, right? So it's inverting the light. All of the black is showing up white. All of the white is showing up black. And then we've got a lot of midtones because there's a lot of grays in the black and white photo. So those are all of our in-between values. And we can think about our value scale from 0 to 10, 10 being our absolute black and 0 being our absolute white. So I'm just going to sketch a little value scale here with the side of my pencil, and I'm going to try to get it to a solid black there. And then I let up on my pressure and blend that out. And I'm using just a 2B, which isn't going to get me a whole lot of variation here, but doing my best. So if we think about that lightest light, and then we've got the 0 is the blank paper. So 0 to 10. Okay, so we've got a lot of midtones happening here on the hand. But we're looking for these organic shapes. So like right here where I see that 10 value, I see that shape right there, this like two-sided shape. And then next to that on the other finger, I see another two-dimensional shape that looks like this. That's the solid 10 shape that I'm seeing. And then let's say the 2 or 3 on the value scale, I'm seeing this shape right next to it. And then I see another 10 shape that goes in and out right there for the wrinkle on the knuckle. So I'm looking for these shapes of shadows and shapes of light. And that's what I want us to be looking for when we do these blind contours. So if you want to watch me first, I'm going to draw Demetrius's hand. I'm going to look at the inverted light photo because maybe that's going to help me to see those shapes of light and dark a little bit more since they're inverted there, and maybe I can disconnect. What I don't want you to do is this. Okay, I don't want that. That's the outer lines. We're looking for all of the contour lines. So all of those three-dimensional lines that we just described. That's why I wanted us to start with this, so that if we started doing our blind contours, we didn't end up with a bunch of sketches that look like this. Okay, so we're really looking for the shapes of the shadows, the shapes of the light, and we want those shadows and light shapes to follow the three dimensions of the form. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my forward-facing view for just a second here. So I want you to position your body where you are not tempted to look down at your paper. I want you to like get your reference photo over here and try not to be like this, because then it's too easy to glance down at your drawing. And the reason to not look at your drawing is because, well, it's two different reasons. One, when you look at your drawing and you're drawing this way, you're very likely to judge what you're doing. And once you judge it, it might throw you off and it might take you out of the exercise. The other rule for this is to keep it one continuous line, and that's for the same reason, so that you don't get distracted and get lost and take you out of the exercise. This is all about pure communication between your eyes and your hand that is drawing. It's not about the product at all, because the product might look a little silly. And this is just to really get us to loosen up and to start to see the hand for the three-dimensional forms that it is. Okay, so y'all have to trust that I'm not looking at my drawing paper. I'm gonna start over here on the pinky knuckle. Okay, I'm looking at those shapes. I'm looking at those three-dimensional shapes of shadows and shapes of light. I'm going really slowly. And this hand, when I'm done, is not necessarily going to look like a hand. It might look like a bunch of blobby shapes all stacked on top of each other. That does not matter. I want you to look for those contours, look for all of those contour lines that we just spent that time drawing, all of those three-dimensional shapes that we talked about, and then also these shapes of light and dark. Okay, so it's gonna look really wonky and weird. I did just glance at the Zoom and realize that I needed to scooch my paper down. And if you do accidentally glance down, just try to get right back into it. Don't get too distracted by what you're seeing, and try to just guide yourself down by uh, the shapes that you're seeing. Look at the relationships of the shapes to each other. So I'm looking for the shapes of the shadows, the shapes of the light. I'm looking for the contour lines, and I'm looking for something that describes those three-dimensional forms. I'm not looking for just outer lines. I'm looking for all of the contour lines that describe the entire surface. And yeah, if you get a little lost, just try to go back to where you think you were. And I know that this is really counterintuitive to how a lot of you would think to draw a hand, to look for these shapes. Just trust it and try it anyway. And this blind contour method should be done really slowly. If you're starting to draw the hand and you're like done in 10 seconds, you probably did not draw all of those three-dimensional forms that we just described and talked about. All right, so yeah, the proportions might be completely off and weird. The whole thing just might look really, in fact, the weirder the better. If your drawing did not look weird, then you probably were not doing this blind contour method. Okay, so I'm gonna just pause a moment and let y'all do that in case you were just watching me. And I'm gonna do another one. I recommend that you do at least 2 or 3 of these to warm up. The more you do them, the more you will be exercising that pure communication from your drawing hand to your eyes, or from your eyes to your drawing hand. The slower you go, the more you're able to remember where you are. If you go too fast, it's easy to get lost and forget where you are on the hand. And when I do this in an in-person class, what I'm looking for is that everybody is slowing down. That's the most important thing to me. I don't care what the drawings look like. I don't care if they glance at their drawings and start laughing. My main concern is that they are going slowly, because going slowly means that you're observing, you're looking, and you're observing, and you're really absorbing what you're seeing. And the beauty of this is that it is developing a muscle memory of these three-dimensional shapes. And this is probably the single most beneficial exercise that you can do to develop your drawing skills, although people don't want to hear that. They want there to be an easier, although I think this is one of the easiest mental break things that you can do. So I don't understand why that bothers people when I say that, but I guess because it's not product based. But if you did this exercise, if you did blind contours for 20 minutes a day, every day for 3 months, you would probably see an amazing improvement in your drawing abilities. And I tell students that all the time, and I've yet to have somebody come to me and say they did it, but it's all about looking. All right, do y'all want to hold up your sketches for me and we can spotlight you and see what some of your blind contours are looking like? I don't want to see any hamburger helper gloves. Those are like just the outer lines. I want to see weird stuff. All right, yes, the wonkier the better. Yeah, I'm really, ooh, I love how the thumb like got really wide and got away from you, but that's so cool. Yeah, those three-dimensional forms are looking beautiful. Let's see. Wow, Sarah, that was your blind contour. You were not looking at your paper. That's so perfect. That's amazing. Let's see. That's beautiful. Love the value that you had there. Oh my gosh. Well, that is just gorgeous. That can't be your blind contour drawing. That's what you've just been drawing this whole time. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that so far. I wanted to see some blind contour practice. I want to see what we just did. Yeah, here we go. Yes, I love to see that. It looks like loaves of French bread, baguettes. That's what the fingers look like when you do a blind contour. It always looks like baguettes. You know, hold yours up too. All right. Yes. I love all those. Yeah, you're really looking at those value shapes. All right. Awesome. Okay, that's probably enough. Oh, one more. Do you want to hold up your sketch? All right. Yes. Yeah, just wanted to see y'all's participation so far. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Rich. I'm gonna go back to my tabletop view. Okay, some of you have already drawn some beautiful hands I see so far. Well, let's go ahead and get back to sketching our hand again. But this time, we're gonna just combine what we've been doing. We're gonna look for those value shapes in addition to the contours. and we're gonna build on the 2D shapes. We're gonna go general to specific, and we're gonna try to get a little more exact this time. And this time y'all are just gonna have to bear with me. I'm gonna start with an H pencil. You're not gonna be able to see my lines at first, but I'm gonna just start out the same way that I did before. So I'm gonna start, I'm gonna do it lightly so that I can make adjustments and have something that's a little more accurate this time. So give me just a moment as I sketch that boomerang shape and that diagonal line and all of those shapes that we talked about. I'm going to start with those rectangles this time so that I don't get my spacing with my hand too far away. And then keep just doing it exactly like we did before, but lightly so that I can make adjustments. And some of you maybe it looked like already did this from those of you that just held up your sketches. Some of you have already gotten more specific with your sketches. But if your proportions were kind of off on that one, like my proportions were off on the first one that I did, meaning the distance of the fingers in relationship to the hand, or the distance of the thumb in relationship to the hand, etc. If those things were like too big or too small or too far away or whatever, this is the one where I want us to get a little more accurate with our proportions. But I'm still starting out with all those same basic shapes. So like I've got my little chicken wing over here. And this time I'm just looking to see that the relationship of the shapes to each other are a little more accurate. So before I start to darken any of my lines, I'm going to start to notice some more specific things like this line here from the pinky. I should be able to trace that down and it should be all connected right here. So we should have the pinky kind of sticks out at a diagonal in the photograph. And then when we stick the pinky out, that might make the spacing of the fingers off in some way. And then want that curve out and then back in and then curve out again. So just really paying attention this time to the spatial differences of things in relationship to each other. We're looking at the negative space. We're looking at these imaginary lines that we drew to see, do they line up accurately to how they do in the photograph? Another thing that can be helpful is to sketch a box to really look at the negative shapes. You could sketch a big rectangle that imitates the rectangle of the photograph, and then look at this big negative space shape here and this big negative space shape here, etc. Like really look at the negative space in relationship to the edge of the photograph box. That could also help. I just noticed that Jessica said, "You make it look easy." And I love that Rich said, "Practice and trust the process." That's wonderful. Yeah, I was even in an in-person class earlier today, and someone was really struggling to see the shapes of shadows and shapes of light on a leaf that we were studying. And I joked, I wish I could just download my years of practice into you to like help you see those shapes. But that's really what it boils down to, is that practice. So if it's not coming super easily, like I said, that blind contour practice that we just did, that is the single most beneficial exercise that you could do every day to strengthen your looking skills and your muscle memory skills, because you're getting that direct communication from your eyes to your drawing hand, meaning you're not drawing from your imagination, which is something that a lot of people struggle with. They're looking at a reference, but they're actually drawing from their memory. They're drawing from their memory of a hand and not the physical hand in front of them. And I realized I didn't give us the easiest subject here, because I gave you a photograph of a hand in the most generic position here, right? But I wanted us to just study the basic shapes and forms of the hand without introducing all of these complicated things, which is what we're going to, get into next week when we do those zoomed in studies. But I am going to simplify it a little bit, because we're going to zoom in. So we're only going to be looking, and we're going to really use the negative space next week as well, as we do those hand studies. And we're going to be using some pen and ink, which is going to allow us to kind of finesse it a little bit in the way that we're going to add that value. So there's a few things about next week's class that I think will yield some good results for everyone, even if you are struggling today with this basic hand shape, basic hand gesture. Okay, so I'm just getting more specific as I draw these fingers. I'm looking at the spacing in between the fingers, and I'm not getting them 100% the way that I'm seeing them, but I'm just trying to get a little more accurate and looking at the thickness of the fingers in relationship to each other. So if they're all a little skinny, then you might want to make those adjustments now. If they're all looking a little too thick, or if one is looking thicker than the other, etc. This is where we're just making those adjustments. And it might help if you're really struggling with these shapes to just look at the value, to rather than drawing the shape of the finger, to do it like we did with the blind contour, where you start with the shape of the shadow. In fact, that's how I often do draw. But sometimes when I recommend that folks do that too soon, then they might get attached to their drawing and they might be less likely to make adjustments. So I think it's still better to go really general and then get more specific as you go along. If you start to put those specific value shapes in there, you just might get attached and not be willing to erase something if the proportions are off. So this time I'm just really looking at proportions and trying to get accurate as far as where these knuckles are lining up for each other. So I can check myself against that line, see that those are lining up. And then these knuckles really don't follow, the line perfectly. They're a bit staggered here. We kind of we connected them with the thread, and we can imagine that boomerang shape connecting them, but they're not falling perfectly across that thread. So this is why we've got to be willing to let go of parts of our drawing. I always commend students in classes who are willing to erase and maybe even start over on a new piece of paper. Not to say that you should be throwing things out and constantly starting over, but just when we get so attached to a drawing that we made, just like in life, sometimes the longer we spend on something, a relationship, a friendship, a project, we're less likely to want to start over, but sometimes you got to be willing to let it go, because if we're going for proportions here, and if you've drawn too dark, or if you can't erase, then my point is, don't be afraid to erase and start over on a finger. It's not the end of the world. Or to start over on the whole hand. If what you're looking for is accurate proportions, then it's unlikely then you're going to get it the first time. Okay, and yeah, these top knuckles are the ones that just definitely don't follow that perfect boomerang thread. They're very staggered. So I'm looking at the relationship of those lines to each other. All right, and then here's where we want to zoom out a little bit and look at the whole thing again before we get too attached, and see, like, does all of this look accurate? Like, do I need to come up a little higher with my middle finger? Probably so. And you can just look at the shape that is created by, and we talked about that thimble shape at the top of the finger. Look at the shape that is created if we think about that as a thimble. Like, is that long enough? Because that might be too short in your drawing. I know it's a little short on all of mine so far. So I'm making that a little longer. And yeah, my original boomerang line just might not have been in the right place. And that would be silly to make the fingers too short just so they could all fit underneath that arbitrary line that you drew. You gotta make adjustments based on what you're seeing. Okay. And then now over here to the thumb. Which is just so fascinating to think about, our hands and what they do, and how important our thumbs are, and how different our thumbs are from the rest of our fingers, and how it's just over here on this little island, right? When you look at the wooden mannequin hand, it's sitting on a little shelf here. So here's our little shelf, right? That wrinkle. I'm going to make sure that we have that line. Oh, let me get my iPad away. Sometimes iPad messes with my light when I'm drawing in graphite and makes it really hard to see. Okay, so we're looking at that negative space and everything here, but we just want to make sure that this shape is proportionally, that it's not floating away from the hand too much, or that it's not too thick or too skinny. So you can start out with those same general shapes, but like the chicken wing and the lines that we drew over here, these diagonal lines that stacked on top of each other. But then we just want to make sure that that is all in relationship to the hand and proportionally accurate. So, and we want it to feel nice and organic. And I just drew it really stiff. So I'm erasing and make it more organic again. I'm looking at that negative space again. Oh, it's really getting away from me this time. I don't know what's going on. I'm like accidentally outlining my same lines as before. Oh my goodness. Okay, let me start out with the big shape again. I'm getting two in my head, and that is what happens. All right, close enough. I feel like I just drew the same thing again, but feels softer. All right, so I think I've got my basic proportions down. I'm gonna go ahead and put those lines in the center of the palm, those palmistry lines in there again. And we have got plenty of time here to add these value shapes on top. So it's easy to get confused and think that my little chicken wing shape that I drew was that. Whatever this is in palmistry. Okay, so now I want to look for the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light and start to render the value that we're seeing on the hand. So Autumn is asking, is this the last hand that we're drawing? Yes, this is the last one. So I think I said there were going to be 3 drawings, but technically, the blind contours are like the third thing, or the second thing, and this is the third thing. I wanted us to just build our way up here, and you might have 3 different drawings if you wanted to like do the diagram separately, and then all those contour lines that we added, and then now I want to get in here and do the hatching and cross hatching lines and add more the shading, the value, the dark and the light, which some of you maybe have already done, like those of you who shared when we were sharing about the blind contours, maybe already did this. But once we're at this point, if you want to go ahead and erase those diagram lines that are in there, and we'll just have more of a realistic drawing of a hand going here, we'll do that. And the other main reason that I want us to use hatching and cross-hatching lines, in addition to them describing those contour lines and the 3-dimensional forms, is because I want us, what we're doing tonight, to be a study for what we're doing next week. So I'm just gonna pull up that pen and ink drawing one more time and show you what we're doing next week. Goodness, I can never just flip book to a page. It's always got to be a whole. I would love to be more graceful sometimes, y'all. Okay, so I wanted us to use hatching and cross hatching tonight so that next week when we're adding the pen and ink detail, we're going to do that using hatching and cross hatching. And so I want us to be thinking in terms of hatching and cross hatching lines. And if you would like some more practice with hatching and cross hatching lines, there is another class that Rich sent you dropped the link for the class on contour lines and 3-dimensional forms. There's another class that came right after that on value shading techniques in pen and ink. There's a little preview for what we're doing in December, some pet portraits. But this kind of unofficial second part of that class on the 3D forms using the lime, we used the pen and ink shading techniques to add value to the limes in pen and ink, and that would be another great class to preview what we're going to be doing next week. And I'll mention that and make sure we have the link for that class at the beginning of the class next week. But for those of you who just maybe want a head start or feel like you need some practice with those shading techniques, you can check that out. Okay, so this is where we might go back. You might look at the true to light photograph might be more helpful for looking at the value shapes, the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light, or it might be more helpful to look at the inverted light version of the photo or the black and white version of the photo. But again, we're just looking for those shapes of shadows and shapes of light like we looked at before we did the blind contours, or as we were doing the blind contours. And so I'm just starting to put those value shapes in here. And the 10 values, the ones that go to absolute 10 that are black, I feel like are the most obvious, but then the less obvious ones are going to be like over here. See, there's this big shadow on the side of the hand right here. So this organic shape on the side of the hand here, and all of these shadows, they fall along those contours, right? Along the contour lines that we've already been looking at. So we can, as we're adding our hatching lines, these one directional lines, we already kind of sketched them when we did the contour lines. We're just curving with those 3 dimensions. And you can use your B pencils and you can soften those lines as you add them. But this is, again, good practice for what we're going to be doing next week with the pen and ink, those pen and ink studies. So we're noticing those 3-dimensional curves, and we're blending with our hatching and cross hatching. When we blend with a pencil, we can blend to the point that we get it to be soft and tonal, like when I drew that value scale earlier. But we can also blend by just the pressure that we're putting on our pencil. And next week when we use the pens, we're going to blend by how closely together we have these lines. So the more we overlap the lines and make those hatching and cross hatching lines close together, the darker our value is going to be. And the more spread apart we make those lines, the lighter our value is going to be. So like I'm going to jump over here to this really dark area here on our little thumb shelf moment. And it gets pretty dark inside of there. So I can just keep overlapping those hatching and cross hatching lines to the point that they feel like a really dark shadow. And I find that it's really helpful to bounce around as I'm shading like this and not stay in one place for too long. So I'm looking for the overall shape of that big shadow. Like in the darker shadows, I can put more pressure on my pencil, or I can just make the spacing really close together, make the hatching and cross hatching lines overlap each other. So it may end up looking really soft, like tonal shading when we're done, but we're building it up using these hatching and cross hatching lines, and we're curving around the 3-dimensional form here. And you can put as little or as much detail in this way as you want. Noticing where that curve is, if it needs to be like more of a downward angle or an upward angle. was just reading Aubrey's comment. Cross-hatching tries to play with your brain because you can get in the zone, and then it's too dark. Then you are paranoid and don't do it enough. That's a good point. Yeah, if you get a little sucked in. But luckily, if you're working with graphite, you can erase it. The easiest way to make sure that you're not putting anything down so dark that you can't erase it is to just use light pressure on your pencil. Because even if I go super dark with my pencil, as long as I let it sit on the surface of the paper, I should be able to erase it, or at least most of it. There might be some residue left, but I get what you mean. I think if that happens, I would just make everything darker. I was trying to encourage people today in my in-person class to make everything more dramatic. I was like, why not exaggerate these shadows? Because they were having a hard time seeing the shadows on these leaf studies that we were doing. And I was like, you can always make shadows more dramatic than they are. So if you go too dark in some places, just make everything darker. I think when we're making art, there's no such thing as being too dramatic. It's very easy for me to get lost in these values because it feels like the shadows just kind of melt into like I see the shadow on the side of the finger and I start to put it in there, and then it's easy to feel like it's not really there and it's all light. Look, I made that point to draw something and then erase it, and then now it's bothering me that I actually didn't fully erase it and I can still see it. Well, and I'm sticking to all these darker shadows, but we still want to get those lighter values in there as well. So this is where I'm going to switch to my H pencil and like notice how there's some like big areas of value that we can start to put in there. So these are the ones that we were sketching before, more as describing the contours, but then we can also use those to describe the lighter areas of value as well. And maybe if you're going too dark in some places, it might be a better idea to start out with the lighter values and then work your way up to the darker values. Because like I can put this shadow in here with my H pencil and keep it super light, and then maybe go back on top of it. Oh my gosh, there is somebody knocking on my door, which never happens, and I'm so sorry. I'll give me one moment. That's not me, that's my neighbor. Sorry, I'm in the middle of an online class. Oh, around that way. Yes. Okay, sorry. Well, that's a new one. That has not happened during one of these classes. My back door too. Sometimes my delivery folks get a little confused because they can't find my neighbor's front door. Anyway, so yeah, if we start out with our H pencil and get those lighter value shapes in there, and then we can go back on top of them. That's what I was about to do. Totally sidetracked. We can go back in with the darker pencil with a B pencil and then make them a little darker and control the values if they were getting too dark that way. Oh, there's my iPad screen's messing with my light again. I think I need to just get it away. I want it next to me so I can look at it, but it just messes with the light so much. The main idea is that you want to be curving these hatching and cross hatching lines where a curve is necessary. And that's definitely going to be important for next week's class when we're working with our pens, because we don't want things to feel flat. The only place we might want lines to be completely flat, or hatching and cross hatching to be completely flat, is in a spot where it's flat, which I think the only part of the hand that appears flat would be like right here in the center. So here I might have some straight lines, some straight hatching and cross hatching lines, because that's the part of the hand that feels flat. And then that'll help create depth, because you'll see all these areas where there's a curve, and then you see that part where it's flat, etc. And it's gonna make sense to the viewer when you put this all together, because that's how we create the optical illusion of drawing. Is we try to create something that a viewer is going to read as that three-dimensional form. And the more we describe that three-dimensional form accurately, the more the viewer is going to read it as the three-dimensional form that we're trying to describe. So if we're trying to describe something flat, then we want lines that are indicating that they're looking at something flat. And if we're looking at something that's curved, then we need some curved lines in there. So like right here, my thumb is looking a little funny, and that's because I haven't really described the values that I'm seeing here yet. So it's all about the light, and we need that light to follow the three dimensions of the form. So like right here, there's this really dark shadow along the outer edge of the thumb, and that is going to really create the depth that I'm missing right here. And now I just went so dark right there that I'm realizing I gotta add more dark values all the way around, because I haven't really matched that same level of value on the other aspects of the hand. As I try to not go super dark with my pencil until I've got everything where I want it. And then, because you can always go add that darkness at the end. Also, I'm left-handed, so if I go too dark with my value with graphite, I'm going to just be smearing it all over the place. I like to use this analogy of trimming your bangs or trimming your beard. You can always trim a little bit more, but once you cut it all off, you can't put it back. So if I try to keep my pressure on my pencil kind of light, I can always, make it darker later. But if I go too dark, then you can't take it back. even though I tried to be supportive and say, if we stay on the surface of the paper, we should be able to erase it. But as I demonstrated, I can still see my smudge there. The easiest way to keep that from happening, unless you want to do my other suggestion, just make it more dramatic, is to just keep it super light until you're ready to make it darker. All right. I think that is looking pretty good. Didn't quite fill in every bit of the value, like in this one, but I also didn't go super dark with my value on that one. One I think is looking a little more accurate in some ways. Okay, well, I'd love to see how y'all's final drawings are looking, or any of your other drawings. I know some of you already shared these more completed drawings earlier when I wanted us to just share the blind contours, but if you want to hold up anything that you drew tonight and share, I'd love to see. Oh yes, autumn, beautiful. Really nice. You got two different drawings there. Yeah, you got the diagram and then the one with all the value. All right, and this is Patty. Oh wow, you already moved on to one of those other photos for next week. Look at all that gorgeous value on that one. That's beautiful, Patty. Wow. This is not your first hand drawing experience, I don't think. Oh yes, of course. Thank you for the note, Patty. You can always watch the recording of next week's class if you miss it. There's Barbara, beautiful Barbara. Yeah, look at I'm really feeling the weight and gesture of those as well. Meant to say that about yours as well, Patty. There was just so much gorgeous weight and gesture movement happening in those. This is Elizabeth. Yeah, look at that value. That's really, the thumb is really looking like the weight is really coming across in that one. Yeah, Kimberly, you've got some good movement and gesture happening with that one as well. All right, and here's Sarah's drawing again. Yeah, Sarah, look at those proportions. That is really nice. And the value is so soft. This is Betty. All right. Yeah, look at that soft value. That's really nice, Betty. Right. I remember y'all's blind contours. Let's see what we got here. Oh, the light in the room is kind of washing it out. Okay, yes, very nice. Yeah, the value on the thumb is really coming along there and on the side of the hand. Oh, wow, look at the rendering on that one. Oh, yeah, you really got the like meaty part of the fingers. Yeah, that's gorgeous. Very nice, y'all. All right. Thank y'all so much for sharing. We've got 4 minutes left here. Does anybody have any questions that I could answer before we go? If not, we will just give you your time back. Yeah, and don't forget to use those hashtags, Make It With Michaels or Michael's Classes if you post on Instagram, and you can tag me at 80 Hodge on Instagram, so I'll be sure to see your drawings, and you can tag at Learn with Michaels as well, and they might even share your drawing on their their Instagram, which is always fun. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the pen class next week, which I see a couple of you are saying you're looking forward to as well. Um, all right, well, I don't see any questions. All right, well, I guess we will just go ahead and end there. Thank you all so much for a wonderful class on drawing hands, and I'll see you next week. We'll use these the same set of the same document, but the reference photos that we didn't get to tonight, we'll be using those for the pen and ink class next week. Looking forward to it. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Rich. Y'all have a wonderful evening. Good night.